Hello, and welcome once again to Neurologic. I'm your host, Leo Jones. Were you aware that autistics can't be astronauts? News to me. Apparently, it's common knowledge. I found out recently from a Facebook post on a parents' autism support group, quote, "So teeny tiny problem. Johnny is really into space and the moon and wants to be an astronaut. And he's wanted to go for a very long time now. And I've always said, that's great, buddy. Thinking in the back of my head that like all children, he'll choose many career paths along the way. But he doesn't seem to be. He is focused on going to the moon. To him, it's going to happen. The end. Well, I looked it up on NASA's site a long time ago. People with autism can't be astronauts. Sure, there are those trying. But allowed to actually go into space? I don't think it'll happen. I hate to discourage Johnny and say, sorry buddy, you can't, but I want to be realistic. Realistically, it's probably not an option for him. So what would you do? See everyone, they checked. It's not happening. People with autism can't be astronauts. It's on NASA's site. Now I wasn't convinced though. So I tried to find the specific link to where NASA prohibits autistics to become astronauts. Reviewing the application and requirements, one finds that they are indeed very, very stringent to just be considered, to be sure. But nowhere was I able to find such a blanket statement expressed so bluntly like it was in that post. And before you ask, yes, I went through the entire application. It's massive and incredibly thorough. Perhaps I need to reach out to NASA via email or a phone call. I'd apply, but I hear broadband prices on the ISS are mind-shatteringly expensive. And then who would run this podcast? I've included a link in the notes for this episode if you're interested in applying to NASA to be an astronaut. It would be deeply appreciated if you could let me know if your application is rejected due to your neurodivergent status. In all seriousness though, being turned down to become an astronaut is a lot more complex than most people realize. Such a position requires not only incredibly robust health and fitness, but also a very focused and academic mind as well. Even then, you can get rejected for a multitude of reasons that are both under and beyond your control. Would a diagnosis of autism automatically eliminate you from the pool of potential astronauts? It is a possibility, but a highly variable one. Comorbid medical diagnoses, or even a genetic test revealing, let's say, a predisposition for cancer, could do that before your neurodivergence is even considered. But being turned down before you even apply is part of an artificial sociological limitation that permeates neurotypical life. A limitation that declares, if you are truly autistic, you simply cannot outperform your neurotypical peers in anything that matters. Many autistics experience this, a catch-22 of sorts. That is, if you're autistic, there is an unspoken, and sometimes spoken, demand that you demonstrate your deficiencies to prove or justify your diagnosis. If you're able to function enough to meet basic standards such as having a job, living almost or entirely by yourself, mastering basic hygiene, being financially solvent, etc., then you're not really autistic. At best, you'll be an inspiration to others and called amazing or some other shallow term and subsequently dismissed. At worst, your diagnosis itself will be questioned to the point that you can't even get basic accommodations. Contrarily, if you need significant supports to live and function, especially if you are non-speaking, then you are the prime example of autism and truly have a disability. Your existence endorses and confirms the societal bias that autistics can't do this thing or that thing, even if you prove otherwise. Kitschy words and phrases such as big heart, doesn't talk but says so much, we laugh with them, and many more come to define your existence in others' eyes. To put it simply, if you can achieve what is deemed impossible for autistics, you're not really autistic. But if you can't, then you are autistic and can only do what others determine is appropriate for you. Now, I can fully agree that disability is real and that some people need accommodations or assistance to live their lives. And yes, some career choices, hobbies, destinations, etc. may not be feasible. However, extrapolating what is realistically possible for a disabled individual's future, then using that to preemptively decide what they should or should not do, that's not considerate, that's confining. A bleakly disheartening possible future where you have no control and everyone knows what's best for you. A cold dissolution of your autonomy. Where does this lead? What else can autistics not do? Live on their own? Get a job that pays a decent wage? Have a relationship with someone beyond the platonic? Be respected and treated equitably? Be taken seriously and credibly? I tried finding a list of what we can't do, but couldn't really find one. Maybe it's one of those things everybody knows that we frequently hear about. Everyone except us, of course. And we can see the effect of this artificial imitation clearly and obviously in our educational systems, in our workplaces, even when trying to find a place to live. But don't worry. Even if you can't get through school or get a job that's not gloomily menial, there will soon be a place for you to exist. That's right! In addition to registries and identification cards, both optional for now, your new home in a segregated zone, let me use the official term. Your new home in an intentional community will allow you to live with other autistics, work with other autistics, and possibly leave for visits to entertainment in the city miles away. In case you haven't heard, intentional communities are steadily becoming popular across the country. At least, of course, for those who can afford it. The phrase intentional community has popped up recently as a milquetoasty and suburban way of describing new, privately funded, decentralized institutions, where it's no longer a daunting brick building, but rows of small homes and/or apartments, with decisions made by non-disabled individuals and family members about what the persons in the intentional community are allowed to do. Until recently, intentional communities used to be rare as they were privately funded, more specifically by very wealthy parents or even relatives of an autistic. The Ford Foundation is one of the latest prominent organizations to endorse intentional communities, gated areas where those with disabilities, in this case autistics who need intermediate to significant supports, live exclusively, fenced off from the greater regional area and community, protecting residents with care attendants and security guards, while presumably protecting the nearby city or town from unauthorized autistic activity. Speaking out against such efforts will get you labeled as a, quote, inclusion zealot, lumped in with the likes of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, also known as ASAN, the American Association of University Centers on Disabilities, also known as AUCD, and the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Rascals all, to be sure. Intentional communities that are not led by autistics, or at the very least led by a coalition of individuals with and without disabilities, a cooperative perhaps, are not communities, but quarantined compounds. The history of institutions has proven this fact. We've had less than a century of inclusion, yet here we are, regurgitating that age-old concept into a shiny new package, pretending this is somehow a new, innovative, and positive approach. And why not? Our intentions are good. Well, we want to think that they are. So naturally, anything we create is inherently good and favorable. For us autistics, of course, this is the opposite of what we truly want, and brings back recent and current memories of places like the Judge Rotenberg Center in Massachusetts, where the residents are forced to wear an electronic shock device called a gradual electronic decelerator Wow, what a sanitized acronym for a taser. Using a remote control, someone else can use the gradual electronic decelerator to give a resident an electric shock. The Judge Rodenberg Center uses this device as an aversive. They use the pain of the electric shock as a punishment for certain behaviors, such as failure to comply. But surely intentional communities wouldn't use such a horrible device, unless of course it was deemed absolutely necessary. Silver lining though, in an intentional community, no one will ponder beyond what's realistic, and depending on where you live, at least you get the pleasure of watching the rockets launch from your intentional window into the unintentional stars. But let's get back to the question though. This parent asked what we would do. So here's my answer. Autistics can be astronauts. The issue here is not that your child has grandiose dreams, but that the perspective of how he is viewed in your eyes leads you to believe he will be rejected if he applies, and he will feel very sad. Let him. Let him feel that. Allow him the experience, the dignity of choosing a path that you consider unrealistic, but could lead to even greater things. There are countless individuals who have been turned down by NASA to be astronauts. There is no shame and no one telling them to be realistic. And in many cases, they find careers working for NASA outside of a spacesuit. Just because a childhood dream doesn't become real doesn't mean it's a dead end. He may not make it into space or the moon, but he could be someone that maps out galaxies or develops a new form of propulsion that allows humankind to fully explore the Milky Way, perhaps even beyond. The fact that you don't know any astronauts that are autistic, or at least individuals who are out about being autistic, doesn't mean that there are none. Throw your realistic expectations out the window. Instead of just offering up, "That's great, buddy," ask him why he wants to go. What he finds so fascinating about space and the moon. And what would he do once he got there? And of course, would he ever want to come back? Encourage him to explore that yearning. Find books, audio recordings, images, videos, etc. that will assist him in learning about space and the moon, as well as how astronauts are selected and trained. But again, leave out the realism, please. He wants to learn. He has a goal. And such educational tools are more accessible and available than they ever have been. Using this as a way to teach him how to learn will be extremely useful as he grows up. And he will remember how much you supported him, even when his dreams may have been just a bit out of reach. I'm Leo Jones, and this has been Neurologic. Neurologic is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. To view a copy of this license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by-nc-nd/4.0 or send the letter to Creative Commons, P.O. Box 1866, Mountain View, California 94042, USA. Neurologic uses the song Furious Freak, created by Kevin MacLeod, for its intro and outro music. Visit him at incompetech.com. Furious Freak is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license, creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0. You can reach Leo Jones and Neurologic by email at neurologicpodcast@gmail.com.